cannot trace it to any deliberate, specific decision making. But in my field encompasses mathematics, technology, computing. I think it was mathematics. I always had a love for math, and then as I went to graduate school, I learned a little bit more about management. But that was the time when computers were beginning to show up in business. So I think it was just time. I got introduced to computing and got very excited about that. And then it moved into mathematics and computing and business. So I think it's being in a certain place at a certain time is really what got me there. So I think Gen Z is also what we refer to as digital natives, people who are born with, and very, very quickly, maybe as early as a year old, started experiencing digital technologies through smartphones and so forth. So at one level, I hope that they really have strong skills in the digital world. And that could mean, working with data, computing, math, and so forth. But I also feel from, what I observe, that they have a very strong social and global awareness, which I hope translates into empathy, because that will be very important for the future. There's, and I don't know how much of that is like the age. At a certain age, you're very idealistic, and I see that. But I also see a lot of people following up on that in their, what they choose to do in graduate school or college, or career would be too early, I think, because the oldest of them are around 20-something. I think it's that mix of living, really growing up with technology, which is going to be so central to our life, but having the other side of general empathy and awareness for a broad set of issues. So for me, as I said, because I grew up studying mathematics, and that, I did not study computing till I was quite old, or economics till I was a lot older, which I make use of now. But mathematics provides such a strong foundation to do any of that, that for me, I don't know how much I would change. Perhaps if I were a college student today, I would do the math. I would definitely add some formal education in computing and in economics. And those two are so central to our lives and society and business. So do I really get a chance to do that? No, I think I don't, in a sense, I don't regret what I did, so I would still pick math. And if I were to look for a minor, which I did not get to do in my educational system, it was very focused, I would definitely pick something from the arts and music. Partly it's what I said earlier, being in the right place or a certain place at a certain time. But I think if I were to think of the more deliberative decisions I have made regarding career, it's actually to focus on life and not job in making those choices. So I have always made my career choices based on what I'm personally passionate about, both professionally, but also the way I want to live my life. And I have not let career objectives shape what my life becomes. I would think that balance is probably the strongest thing for me. So you're probably getting a trend from there. I do not look back, so I don't think of worst decisions in terms of regrets. I wish I had done something differently. So it's probably very hard for me to identify that. If you really, really pushed me to it, I spent 10 years living in Monterey at the Naval Postgraduate School, and that place is paradise. And so very often when people know that I lived there and then do not live there anymore, that sounds like a really bad choice to have made that decision to move out. Balance, so that is actually a formal part of my education. I studied taking mathematics into decision making. And one of the things you realize is almost every decision involves many, many different criteria or objectives. And a lot of people who don't understand that really go very linearly and try to optimize on one thing. And if you're trying to make a choice and make it work on many dimensions, it's almost always certain that the best solution, it's somewhere in the middle of certain things. It's never at extremes. So that has been part of how I do things. But I think that you always have to bring in, this being in the right place at the right time. There's definitely luck involved. And sometimes luck is being prepared for the unanticipated things that come up. So, accidents are not always accidents. They are things that are done deliberately in error. And similarly, in some sense, good outcomes are also not always luck or accidental, but there is an element of luck, but you can prepare yourself to be lucky to some extent. So like I said, my doctoral dissertation was in decision sciences, so I have an interesting perspective on that. Well, there are at least two classes of tough decisions. One is those decisions where you have time to think. And there I can actually apply a lot of the things I learned professionally as part of my education and what I do. And so there I think I can think very scientifically about decisions, even decisions that seem like very soft decisions. You can actually learn to analyze them more carefully. And that doesn't mean sitting down and actually building formal models, but because I do that professionally in my life, it becomes very intuitive to make those types of decisions. The second is where you have to make tough decisions instinctively, right? And I think those are definitely reflexive decisions. And just like you do, you can do physical things reflexively because you've trained your muscles to do that. I think that's how I would approach instinctive tough decisions, that if you've had a lot of thinking and experience about making decisions, then it becomes part of muscle memory. And so I think for me, it's my scientific decision-making background that feeds into both kinds of decisions. In fact, the ones that you get more time, I'm actually bad at, because I end up analyzing so much, and there is this thing we call decision paralysis, right? You can run into too much of thinking about it, and I think sometimes I do that. But since I know that, I try not to. So I kind of want to say nature, or a natural way of living, because we have to get nature, or the things that we humans should be doing naturally, we have to insert them artificially into our schedules. Go work out in a gym, or go take a hike somewhere because we don't get to walk enough. And I feel we are progressively moving more and more towards living in a box, or a technology box, or other kind of thing, where I think if you've had enough experience living a different kind of life, you do feel like nostalgic for that, and being able to do things more naturally, being in more control of your own time. That's a tough one. So for the first part, my favorite authors. So I'll tell you what my favorite genre is. So it tends to be nonfiction, and within that, particularly biographies and autobiographies. So it's hard to identify authors there because it's really the personalities. And then another category is, for instance, I never really learned physics as a kid, but I admire people like Stephen Hawking or Richard Feynman, who can take extremely complex ideas in physics, at least looking very complex to me, and explain them at a point where I can understand really well. Another category I love is history and political sorts of topics. So I love reading Bob Woodward's books, which are again about their nonfiction. And then, one book that I read last year, which really, really impressed me, which one that I could probably recommend, is a book by a guy called Paul Kalanithi, who was a neurosurgeon at Stanford and died of cancer when he was in his mid-30s. And he wrote this book called When Breath Meets Air in the last 2 or 3 years of his life, and he was dealing with the illness, and it was actually finished after his death by his wife using his notes. It's a book you cannot put down once you start reading. Extremely wonderful, if I can say, storytelling, but on a very, very deep topic.